This is the next in our series of videos regarding safeguarding children and adults, and as you can see, this one's going to be focusing on recognising physical abuse. As you can see, there's lots of different complicating factors when you're starting to think about recognising physical abuse. And one of the most difficult things is that people are often confronted with an injury and they're not quite sure whether that injury means the person has been deliberately harmed or accidentally harmed. So what we want to do today is set you out with a few pointers to help you think about that a little bit more clearly. Have a look at a few of these with me and see what you think. Indicators quite often include that there actually is no explanation given, or perhaps the explanation is not very consistent. It could make up different forms of injuries, bruising, cuts, different marks to parts of the body, and take a few moments to pause this video and have a look at this list and think about each of them for us for a few minutes. Don't forget that physical abuse can also include force feeding or withholding medication, or the improper use of medication or sedation. They all come under the category of physical abuse, and sometimes we would overlook these. Also, don't forget about the explanation that's been given. Think about little things like the timeline. Does that timeline work for you? Does it sound right? Did the person wait for far too long before getting help? Or does the explanation that you're being presented with not quite fit with the injury that you're seeing in front of you as a worker within the trust? What about the pattern? Sometimes when we see patterns of bruises, that can be quite a strong indicator that there's something's gone wrong. That can include things like fingertip bruising marks or straight edges or other patterns that you kind of, that looks familiar, and you're wondering, was that caused by an object, or does it actually look like a natural injury that has happened to this person? And then as well as that, we need to be thinking about the location of the injury, because sometimes the location of the injury will actually give us a really strong indicator as to whether or not the person was accidentally harmed. So think about it with me for a wee minute. Whenever you have an accidental injury, where's the most likely place to be injured? It's probably the bony parts of the head and face, possibly the elbows, the fronts of the knees, shins, those sorts of areas that we quite often find where we have bony parts been covered with thin layers of skin. But you can also get indicators from the age and stage of development of the person. So if a young person who's very active has lots of bruises on the fronts of their shins, below the knee, and they're telling you that they play an awful lot of football, that might well be accidental injuries. But there are other sites that you'd be a bit more worried about if you saw those. Now, this body map shows you that the softer tissue areas of the body are much more concerning whenever we see injuries there. You also want to be concerned if you see injuries to both sides of the body. So bilateral black eyes, both sides of both arms been injured, soft tissue injuries as we've mentioned as well, but also think about injuries that aren't related to each other and maybe lots of them, again, all in these softer areas, and possibly even the fronts of the hands for defense injuries as well. We also need to think about restrictive practices, because sometimes we do have to restrain people or restrict their movement slightly or whatever during various processes, or to keep them safe from harm. But again, there's a policy and procedure around this, so just have a look at that. But remember that what you do as a restrictive practice must be legal, it must be ethically justified, and it must also be done to prevent serious harm to that person or to others. And it must always be the least restrictive option. And bear in mind that this isn't just about adult protection, but that we also need to be thinking about the protection of children as well. and some of these principles are relevant for both. We need to be thinking about protecting children as well as adults, so please think about some of these principles if you're also thinking about safeguarding of children. And remember, if you're going to make a referral about safeguarding a child, to use the Unicini form if you're working in Northern Ireland, or use the APP1 form if you're working with adults at risk of harm. And remember, whenever you're working to protect somebody, you don't necessarily have to have their consent to make a referral, especially if you think what has happened to them is a crime. And if somebody has been physically assaulted by a member of staff, that's a crime that you must report through the safeguarding processes, as it is with a non-accidental injury of a child. So thank you for listening, and please think a little bit more about the topics that we've just covered.